Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to explore how to prepare for your upcoming assessment on climate change. Now, your teacher will have just notified you about a date for the assessment, and there will be a due date attached to the instruction that comes with this particular assignment. And you need to pay attention to how much time you have got. It's likely you will have roughly a week or so in order to prepare all the different materials, learn the different content you picked up over the course, and be ready to sit that examination. And in all likelihood, the assessment is going to be a collection of questions, 3 or 4 questions, and it's going to be worth probably around about 20 marks. So the first thing you need to do is follow this tutorial all the way through, and I'll ask you to pause at various points where I'd like you to explore the different resources you can use in order to prepare yourself for the assessment. The very first resource I'd recommend you use is in the Google Classroom that you can see in front of you, and you'll find a tab in the classwork section called Revision Website, and I would encourage you to start any assessment before you actually start revising by looking at this revision checklist. So when you click on this, it will open up a Google Sheet. It will make a copy for you to use that will look something like this. It should look exactly like that, actually. Okay. And on the tab, on the page, you'll see 3 tabs. Now, climate change goes with the Global Issues tab, so you need to click on the Global Issues along at the bottom. Now, at this stage, what I would suggest you do is just pause the video and open up this Google checklist if you haven't done so already, and click on the 3rd tab. And when you click on that 3rd tab, it will bring you up the 2 global issues that you will be studying as part of your National 5 course. And of course, the one that this tutorial is focused on is climate change. And what you can see here, if you look closely, and I'm just going to increase the zoom so we can see that clear on our screens, is each of the main learning outcomes that you need to be capable of doing in order to answer any possible exam question on this topic. And the way to use these checklists is to review the learning required. So, for example, describing patterns on graphs. Have you looked at that particular skill? And when you have looked at it, you would click review. Have you practiced any questions on it? If you do practice an exam question that involves a graph that you have to describe, then you would click here. And if you're comfortable that you know what to do, and this would always be a 4-mark exam question, and you've practiced a question, then you might think, okay, I'm complete there. And that's how to use these digital checklists. They show you what can be in the assessment, and the questions you get asked can only come from these, what we call learning outcomes. Okay, so that will guide you. What you might even want to do is actually write each of these down on a piece of paper or on a flashcard, for example, if you use flashcards to study, and then prepare yourself an answer on the reverse side of the flashcard. You might want to turn each of these into spider diagrams or some other revision resource you have. What's important is you don't just rely on reading through notes, but not actually taking your own notes. It's much more effective learning if you are looking at material you've learned in class and then writing out your own notes or diagrams or flashcards using that information. Okay, so that is the first key thing. What could I be assessed on? The next thing you're going to want to look at is resources that can help you learn the material that you have actually been required to be assessed on in this checklist. Now, there are a number of routes you can do to learning material. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is use your main class notes. So if we have a little look at that, your teacher will have asked you to copy across each of your assignments into this Student Master Notes set. And that should have already been done, and you can open up that document and look at all of the notes you took across all of the different assignments that made up the climate change topic. Embedded in all of those notes will be the key information to answer all of those learning outcomes in the checklist. So that is one way, and it's strongly recommended you do review all of the different notes. And you'll actually realize that when you open up the master document, it's quite a big document. There is quite a lot of material that we've covered in the course of this topic. You might also notice some gaps, for example, if you missed a lesson. And that's something you're going to want to fill in, maybe from another student copying you the missing material, and you can then paste it into this master file. Now, that's a lengthy way of revising. A quicker way of just getting a quick idea is to use one of the two books you've been given. So now what I'd suggest you do is open up, let me get the correct book. Here we are, this How to Pass book. Now, if you open this book up in front of you, it should be on your table as I'm speaking, because I'm hoping your teacher will have given it to you during this lesson. If not, it'll be at home. But when you open up to the contents page, you look down and you'll see the three main units: physical environments, section 1, section 2, human environments, and the one we're interested in is section 3, global issues. And you'll see climate change is marked there, and it says page 56. So what I'm going to ask you all to do now is turn to page 56. Now, when you get to page 56, there you will find climate change. And there's a little introduction about what is climate change. You've then got the causes, the physical causes on page 56, and the human reasons on page 57. You have some effects of climate change on 57, moving on to managing climate change on 58, with some key terms on page 59. Now, what is important to stress about these quick revision guides with their bullet points is they probably wouldn't give you the ability to get full marks, especially for a 6-mark exam question. There's probably not enough information in them to allow you to do that, but they are quick ways of reading through and getting some key ideas, and it certainly is much quicker than going through your master note set. Okay, so let's just close that. You might want to spend a bit of time looking at that. If not, just close it. And I'd now like you to open up the other study guide you were given. Okay, I'm going to come back to this one, but you have got this booklet, and this is going to allow you to practice questions. Now, I'm not going to ask you to actually look into this right now, but this is a very important resource if you want to maximize your potential, because you don't want to just learn, you actually want to practice exam questions in preparation for assessments. So we're going to come back to this one in a second. So what I'd now like you to do is go back to the Google Classroom, click on your screen, and find the National Fire Provision website and open it up. Click on this sign in, it'll ask you to sign in, and it'll bring up this. Now, I've just paused the video now, wait for this to load up. Okay, assuming this is the screen that's now in front of you on your own computer screen, you're going to see the 3 sections of the course, just like you did in the How to Pass guidebook. Okay? And because we are doing a global issue, that's what you are going to open up in a second. But before we open that up, we do have some past paper exam questions as you scroll down. I'll come back to these later because these are another useful sources to prepare for examinations. But let's just have a look at learning knowledge, because the first thing I told you to do was to use your main master note set for the topic, climate change. The second thing I suggested you could use for a much quicker way of getting just the key ideas was the How to Pass National 5 book. The third route is using this revision website. Now, if we just have a look at this revision website, there's a lot of information in it, so you need to take your time. And there's 2 global issues, and these are the 2 that we're going to be studying. This one down here, health, will be studied in S4. We're interested in this one here, climate change. So click on that tile, and that's going to bring you into the section on climate change, and you'll see there's quite a few resources. Now, let's just have a quick little look at these resources. Here we have a checklist. I recommend you might want to open this. It's very similar to the checklist, this one here. Okay, so it's a quick version of that checklist. Okay, and it outlines the key ideas and skills. What else you've got are some video tutorials that outline how to answer different types of questions. So this is how to answer questions on effects and consequences of climate change. This is how to answer questions on the causes. This is how to answer questions on the solutions and managing climate change. We also have a website. Is Scotland leading the way in climate change? You can use that to get more information. We have a video on greenhouse effect. You can click on any of these resources and they'll all support your preparation for revising for the climate change topic. Okay. Let's now think about, we'll come back to this website in a second, and I now want to talk a little bit about once you've done the learning of the knowledge and you've made up your own flashcards or written your own notes around each of the key themes from the checklist, you're now going to think about practicing some exam questions. So there's a number of ways you can do that. First of all, you've been given this booklet, and this is a very useful booklet. So you want to get it back in front of you again and open it up to the contents page. And you'll see it's broken into three key areas. There's the practice questions, and you'll see section 3, global issues, if you scan your eye down that list, and they start on page 25. You'll see that there are some practice papers. So there's practice paper 1 and practice paper 2. And then there's the answers to those practice papers. And I'm going to look at all of the climate change possibilities. But let's start by looking at page 25, where we have some practice questions. Now, on page 25, you will see global issues, and a little bit of information about how to complete global issues questions. And then you're going to see some questions involving graphs on page 26. All description questions. There's a nice description of a map question on page 27 with some top tips on how to answer. And if you turn over to page 28, there's more questions on how to describe maps. Now, these are skills describing maps. They're never explained. So even though you might not be able to think, you look at it and think, for example, on page 28, there's a question on the distribution of earthquakes. And on page 29, there's a distribution of malaria. It doesn't really matter what the question is. The skill of describing a map is always the same, as it is with a graph. If you look on page 30 and 31, you'll see lots of techniques on how to describe graphs. And I would definitely read all of these pages, look at the questions, all the way from 26 through to page 31. Once you've had a look at those, you'll be in a very strong position on answering questions. And I should add, if you want to get the answers to those questions from page 26 to page 31, then all you've got to do is turn to the answers, and you'll find them on pages 42, 43, and they give you an example of how you answer all of those questions. You'll notice they're all worth 4 marks. So could I strongly recommend either at home tonight or some point before the assessment, you practice quite a few of them. Now, if you're trying to revise for this topic, the knowledge, let's just have a look at the climate change information that you're going to want to use. Okay, if you turn to page 33, you will see some information on Part B questions, which are known as the cause questions or the consequence questions. So on page 34, you'll see question 13 is a climate change question. You might want to practice that one. Okay. Then you've got effects and impacts questions. That's another type of question you often see. They don't have an example of a climate change impact question in these samples. But when you get to page 37, you want to turn to that now. You will see on page 20, question 20 is explaining how climate change can be managed. Now, those two questions, the causes on question 13 and question 20, if you then turn to the answers, and you'll find the answers on page 44. So just turn to page 44. Question 13, you can see a way you could answer that question that you saw on the previous page. And then on page 45, you can see the way you might answer a climate change question. That's question 20. Right, lots of practice questions there. Then you can have a look at the practice papers. Now, the global issue is always the last part of an exam paper. So if you want to turn to see a global issue question, if you turn to page 60, you will see at the top of page 60, it says attempt any 2 questions. Now, we have only studied question 13 of climate change, and there are 2 climate change questions on page 60. You might want to practice them, or at least look at them, because your question might be very similar to that. That's practice paper 1. Let's have a look at practice paper 2. And if you turn a bit further on to page 73, there is another climate change question. This time it's question 12, and you'll see it's part A and part B. And once again, you've got 2 exam questions, a 4-marker and a 6-marker. Finally, there are answers to those questions at the back of this booklet. The practice paper 1 answers are on page 83, and you'll see answers to the climate change questions. And the paper 2 practice questions I was just looking at are on just turning through page 92. Right, that is how to use the thing that's on. I'll just go back to the main screen you're at, which you've hopefully been looking at your book. What you want to do now is either practice them or pause the video, or the final area to practice questions, and there's 2 ways you can do this, is to go into the National 5 And some of these parts of the revision site actually have practice questions as well as model answers. But one place to go is actually back to the home page, which you'll see I'm clicking on the screen, and just return to the front page. And if you really are getting into practicing questions and you want to practice every single possible exam question you're ever going to see in this topic, then go to the past papers. Let's have a little look at past paper from 2019. Okay. Now, I just want to draw your attention now. I've given you a lot of information, but the exam changed a few years ago, and the only exam papers that look like the current version of National 5 Geography exam are the 2018 and 2019 papers. So those are the two that I mainly get students to focus on. Now here is a real exam paper sat by students back in 2019, and you'll see it's worth 80 marks. And what you'll notice as you scan your eye down, there's the section 1 again, called Physical Environments. We'll do those topics later on in the course. There's the section 2, the Human Environments. We're going to be doing these topics. And all those questions add up to 30 marks for that section and 30 marks for that section. Then we get to this topic, the global issues. Now, this has been our first topic in National 5 Geography. And we've been told we're going to have to do 2. Of course, we've only studied 1 topic so far. But there it is, question 14, climate change. It's always the first of the global issues topics that appears in the exam paper. So if we scroll through this exam and see what did students have to answer that year, they would have first got to this paper and they would have seen that page 14 is the climate change. And they know they've studied that topic. And the other topic we're going to do, there it is at the end, it's the last question. And in this exam, it would have been on page 24. And if we scroll onto it, we can see a graph. Now, earlier I said you want to practice those graph questions in the geography question and papers booklet. Why? Because there is always a 4-mark question, and it's very often a graph. It could be a map, and it always says describe. Now, when it's a graph, you're being asked to describe a pattern of change, and we will spend a bit of time in class looking at how to describe patterns of change on a graph. If it's a map, you have to describe a pattern on a map. But it's always 4 marks, and there is a way of describing a pattern. The second question is always a 6-marker. And we've got a little resource here, and then the question says, explain in detail, and this time it's strategies to minimize future climate change. So what they're really asking is, how can we reduce the effects? How can we solve the problem? And it's always a 6-mark question. Now, in this exam, you're going to get 2 4-markers and 2 6-mark questions. So you're going to be covering quite a bit of climate change topics. So you need to get yourself prepared. You can use this video, rewind back anytime you want. You can use any combination of the resources I've suggested, whether it's the 2 books you were given in class to use, whether it's your master note set, the checklist, or the Google Revision website. There's no shortage of places you can go to prepare for this assessment. What is important is that you do prepare, that you do actually write your own physical notes out, you prepare possibly flashcards, you make any type of resource that helps you revise, and then after you finish the test, keep that resource. Don't lose it, don't throw it away, because in S4, there's a very strong chance you're going to want to use it again when you prepare for your final exams. Good luck, and you'll be given some time in class to get ready for this first major assessment.